The alien marketplace buzzed with activity as creatures from dozens of worlds traded their wares. Massive Korthak warriors stomped through the crowds, their 6 arms carrying exotic weapons. Flying Zephyrite darted overhead, their crystalline wings catching the artificial sunlight of Station Nexus. In the center of it all stood the Battle Beast auction house, where the galaxy's finest war animals were bought and sold. Commander Thakmor of the Hegemony Fleet examined the creatures on display. His reptilian eyes scanned past the massive thunderwolves of Rigel Prime, each one worth a small fortune. He ignored the saber-toothed cats from the ice world of Kirion, though their handlers insisted they could tear through starship hulls. What he sought was something special, something that would give his forces an edge in the coming war against the rebellious outer colonies. This one, Commander, his aide pointed to a sleek, dark creature standing alone in the corner pen. The traders call it an earth horse. They say it was bred for battle on a death world called Terra. Thakmor approached the pen with interest. The creature was unlike anything he had seen. It stood on 4 legs, its body covered in smooth skin rather than scales or fur. Its eyes were large and brown, showing an intelligence that surprised him. The creature was smaller than most battle beasts, standing only as tall as his chest, but there was something about its posture that spoke of strength. "Tell me about this earth horse," Thakmor commanded the trader. A nervous Volantian with too many eyes. The trader wrung his hands. "Ah yes, the Terran battle horse, very rare, very special. This one is called Storm. The humans who sold him said he was trained for combat, bred from a line of warrior horses that carried knights into battle for thousands of years." Storm lifted his head at the mention of his name. His ears pricked forward, and for a moment, Thakmor saw something that looked almost like hope in those dark eyes. The horse had been magnificent once, that much was clear. His black coat gleamed despite the poor conditions of the auction house, and his muscles spoke of power and speed. "What is his combat record?" Thakmor asked. The trader's expression fell. "Well, you see, there have been some difficulties. The previous 3 buyers returned him. The Vorthon warlord said he was too weak. The skeleton pirates claimed he wouldn't fight. The Draconian Empire called him useless in battle." Thakmor frowned. "Then why should I waste my credits on a failed war beast?" "Because the price is very low," the trader said quickly. "Look, I need to move him today. Make me an offer, any offer, and he's yours." Storm seemed to understand he was being discussed. His head drooped, and he turned away from the crowd. Thakmor had seen this behavior before in Broken Soldiers. The horse had lost his spirit, his will to fight. In the brutal galaxy where only the strong survived, a creature without fighting spirit was worthless. "I'll give you 50 credits, Thakmor said dismissively. "Sold," the trader exclaimed almost too quickly. As the credits transferred, Thakmor wondered if he had just made a mistake. 50 credits wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing either. He looked at Storm again. The horse stood with his head down, his whole body radiating defeat. Perhaps he could use him as a pack animal, or maybe for food if things got desperate. The transport to Thakmor's battle cruiser was uncomfortable for Storm. The cargo bay was designed for equipment, not living creatures. Storm was placed in a corner, given a small amount of water and some protein pellets that were meant for the ship's warhounds. The pellets tasted like metal and chemicals, nothing like the sweet grass and oats he remembered from Earth. The ship's crew looked at him with curiosity and disappointment. They had expected a fearsome battle beast, something that would strike terror into their enemies. Instead, they got what looked like a large, sad pet. The Korthak warriors laughed when they saw him. The insectoid communications officer clicked his mandibles in what Thakmor recognized as amusement. "This is our secret weapon?" asked Lieutenant Veltar, Thakmor's second-in-command. "It looks ready to die of sadness." Thakmor had to admit his purchase looked like a mistake. Storm barely moved, barely ate, and showed no interest in the combat training equipment they tried to introduce him to. When they brought out practice weapons, he simply stood still. When they activated combat holograms, he didn't react. It was as if the horse had given up on everything. Maybe the humans lied about his breeding, Veltar suggested. Maybe he was never a war horse at all. Perhaps, Thakmor agreed, but something nagged at him. He had dealt with humans before, during the trade wars. They were a young species, barely out of their home system, but they had shown surprising resilience. Their warriors fought with a ferocity that impressed even the hegemony's finest soldiers. It seemed strange that such a species would produce a creature so broken. 3 days into the journey to the Outer Rim, Storm collapsed. He had been eating very little, and the stress of his situation had weakened him further. The ship's medical officer, a spider-like arachnid, examined him with her scanners. "The creature is dying," she reported. "His biological systems are shutting down. It appears to be a combination of malnutrition, stress, and what humans might call a broken heart." Takmor stared down at the fallen horse. Storm's breathing was shallow, his eyes half closed. This was not how a warrior should die, not even a failed one. There was something undignified about letting him waste away in a cargo hold. "Can you save him?" Takmor asked. The arachnid shrugged, a complex gesture with her multiple arms. "I could try medical intervention, but what would be the point? You said yourself he's useless as a battle beast." Takmor considered this. The logical thing would be to let nature take its course and dispose of the body when they reach their destination. But as he looked at Storm lying there, he remembered something his mentor had once told him. Sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who have lost everything and found it again. "Do what you can for him," Takmor ordered. "We'll see if there's any fight left in this earth creature." The arachnid injected Storm with nutrients and stimulants. His breathing improved, but he remained motionless on the cargo bay floor. As the ship continued its journey through hyperspace, Storm lay in the corner, a living reminder of Takmor's questionable judgment. None of them knew that soon their opinions of the Earth Horse would change forever. The hegemony battlecruiser Devastator dropped out of hyperspace near the mining colony of Zarian 7. Commander Takmor stood on the bridge, studying the tactical displays. The rebel forces had fortified themselves in the asteroid mining facilities, using the rocky terrain to their advantage. It would be a difficult battle, requiring ground forces to flush out the defenders. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," reported the communications officer. "Put it through," Takmor commanded. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a young human female in worn mining clothes. Her hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes burned with determination. "This is Sarah Chen, speaking for the free colonies of Zarian 7, she said, her voice steady despite facing one of the hegemony's most feared commanders. "We demand you withdraw from our system immediately." Takmor's crew laughed at her audacity. A single human girl, no more than 20 years old, making demands of the hegemony fleet. It was almost amusing. "I am Commander Takmor," he replied coldly. "You will surrender your facilities and submit to hegemony authority, or we will take them by force." Sarah's expression didn't waver. "Then I guess we'll see you on the ground, Commander." The transmission ended. Takmor admired her courage, even as he prepared to crush her rebellion. Humans had an annoying habit of fighting long past the point where surrender would have been sensible. "Prepare the landing forces," Takmor ordered. "We'll need heavy assault units for the asteroid tunnels." "What about the horse, sir?" Lieutenant Veltar asked. "Should we leave him aboard?" Takmor paused. Storm had recovered somewhat from his collapse, though he remained listless and unresponsive. The horse now stood in his corner of the cargo bay, eating the bare minimum to survive. Bring him, Takmor decided. If nothing else, he can carry supplies. The landing craft descended through Zarian 7's thin atmosphere toward the main mining complex. The asteroid was barely large enough to hold an atmosphere, its gravity weak and artificial. The mining operation had carved deep tunnels into the rock, creating a maze of passages that would favor defenders. Storm was loaded into one of the supply transports, along with ammunition and medical supplies. The horse stood quietly as the craft shook with atmospheric entry, his head hanging low. The other soldiers paid him no attention, focused on their weapons and battle preparations. The landing zone was a flat area outside the main mining entrance. As the hegemony forces deployed, rebel weapons opened fire from hidden positions in the rocky outcroppings. Las blasts and projectile weapons lit up the thin air, forcing the soldiers to take cover behind their transports. "They're well positioned," Veltar observed, crouching next to Takmor behind an armored vehicle. "This could take days to clear." Takmor nodded grimly. The rebels knew their terrain and had prepared well. His forces would eventually overwhelm them through superior firepower, but the cost would be high. An explosion rocked the transport where Storm was being held. Rebel mortars had found their range, and the supply vehicles were taking heavy fire. The horse was thrown to the side as the transport's armor buckled. "The supply convoy is taking casualties," reported a sergeant over the comm. "We're losing vehicles." Storm struggled to his feet inside the damaged transport. Through the twisted metal, he could see the battle raging outside. Soldiers were running, taking cover, returning fire. The smell of burning metal and ozone filled the air, and then through the chaos he heard something that made his ears prick up. A human voice calling out orders in English. Fall back to position 3. Cover the wounded! Storm's head lifted for the first time in weeks. Somewhere in this battle was a human. His people. The voice was female, young, but it carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed under pressure. Storm felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since leaving Earth. Another explosion rocked the transport, this time tearing open the back doors. Storm could see outside clearly now. Hegemony soldiers were advancing on the mining complex while rebels fired from concealed positions. The battle was fierce and chaotic, but Storm's attention was focused on something else. Near the mining entrance, he caught a glimpse of movement. A young human female in mining clothes was directing a group of defenders, pointing out targets and coordinating their fire. Even at a distance, Storm could see the determined set of her shoulders, the way she moved with purpose and confidence. Sarah Chen had taken personal command of the defense. Refusing to hide in the deeper tunnels while others fought for their freedom, she carried an old-model plasma rifle and wore improvised armor made from mining equipment. Her people looked to her for guidance, and she gave it without hesitation. Storm watched as Sarah spotted a group of wounded rebels trying to reach safety. Without thinking of her own danger, she ran into the open to help them. A hegemony sniper's beam barely missed her head, scorching the rock where she had been standing. Something awakened in Storm as he watched this young human risk everything for her people. It was the same spirit he had seen in his previous riders, the knights and cavalry officers who had charged into impossible odds because someone had to. This girl had the heart of a warrior, and she was in danger. Storm pushed against the damaged transport doors. They were twisted and partially blocked, but his strength and determination had returned. With a surge of power that surprised even him, he broke free from the wreckage. The horse stepped onto the battlefield for the first time since Earth. His hooves found purchase on the rocky ground as he took in the scene around him. Hegemony soldiers were advancing in formation, their weapons cutting down anything that moved. The rebels were fighting bravely but were clearly outmatched. A hegemony warrior noticed Storm standing free and raised his weapon, thinking the horse might be some kind of rebel war beast. But before he could fire, Storm did something unexpected. He stood perfectly still. The soldier was confused. War beasts were supposed to attack or flee, not stand motionless in a firefight. Storm's behavior was so strange that the warrior hesitated, unsure whether the horse was even a threat. That hesitation saved the soldier's life, because Storm was not interested in fighting random soldiers. His attention was entirely focused on the brave young woman leading the rebel defense. For the first time since leaving Earth, Storm had found something worth protecting. As the battle raged around him, Storm began to move. His steps were measured and deliberate as he picked his way across the battlefield. Soldiers on both sides noticed the strange sight of an unarmored horse calmly walking through heavy weapons fire, seemingly unafraid of the chaos surrounding him. Storm was heading toward Sarah Chen, though he didn't yet know her name. All he knew was that she reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he had once fought for. The spirit of Earth's warriors lived in this young woman, and Storm would not let her fight alone. Sarah Chen pressed her back against the rocky outcropping, reloading her plasma rifle as energy blasts scorched the air above her head. The hegemony forces were closing in on their position, and her small group of defenders was running out of options. They had held the mining complex for 3 hours, but superior numbers and firepower were telling. Sarah called Marcus, her second in command. "We need to fall back to the inner tunnels. They're going to overrun us." Sarah checked her weapons charge indicator. Half power remaining. Around her, the miners-turned soldiers were down to their last few shots. They had fought bravely, but they were not professional warriors. They were people fighting for their homes, their freedom, and their right to exist without hegemony oppression. "Not yet," Sarah replied firmly. "If we can hold them here another 20 minutes, the evacuation shuttles can get the civilians away." She peered around the rock, looking for targets. The hegemony soldiers advanced in perfect formation, their dark armor gleaming in the artificial sunlight. These were not the conscript troops of the Outer Rim. These were elite forces, probably from one of the core worlds. A movement caught her eye. Something impossible was happening on the battlefield. A horse, an actual Earth horse, was walking calmly through the combat zone. Last blasts and projectiles filled the air around the animal, but it seemed completely unafraid. Its dark coat shone as it picked its way across the rocky terrain with the grace of a dancer. What the hell? Marcus followed her gaze. Is that one of ours? Sarah shook her head in amazement. She knew every person and every piece of equipment in the colony. There were no horses on Zarian 7th. The closest Earth animals were 3 systems away. Yet here was a magnificent black stallion walking through a war zone like he owned it. The horse seemed to be heading in their direction. Sarah watched in fascination as hegemony soldiers noticed the animal, but held their fire. Even they seemed confused by the strange sight. The horse showed no aggression, made no threatening moves, but there was something in its bearing that commanded respect. Sarah, we need to move now. Marcus grabbed her arm. The left flank is collapsing. She turned to see that he was right. A squad of hegemony shock troops had broken through their defensive line and were flanking their position. In minutes, they would be surrounded. All units fall back to checkpoint 7, Sarah commanded into her comm unit. Prepare for fighting withdrawal. As her people began their retreat, Sarah took one last look at the approaching horse. The animal was closer now, maybe 50 meters away. She could see its eyes clearly, dark, intelligent, and somehow familiar. It was looking directly at her, and in that gaze she saw something that reminded her of the old stories her grandmother used to tell about the cavalry horses of ancient Earth. A plasma bolt exploded against the rock next to her head, forcing her to duck. When she looked up again, the horse was gone. Sarah and her remaining fighters fell back through the mining complex's outer defenses. The hegemony forces followed methodically, clearing each position with overwhelming firepower. The rebels' plan was working. They were buying time for the civilian evacuation, but the cost was becoming severe. They reached checkpoint 7, a narrow passage between 2 large storage tanks. It was a good defensive position, but once the enemy flanked it, there would be nowhere left to retreat except the inner tunnels. How many do we have left? Sarah asked as her people took positions. Marcus checked his tactical display. 17 combat effective. Maybe 20 if we count the walking wounded. 17 people against an entire hegemony assault force. Sarah had known this moment would come eventually. When the free colonies had declared independence, everyone understood it might be a one-way trip. But seeing the children and elderly civilians boarding evacuation shuttles made every sacrifice worthwhile. Movement on the left flank, called Rodriguez, one of their scouts. Looks like a full squad moving to surround us. Sarah raised her rifle, but before she could acquire a target, something extraordinary happened. The black horse appeared at the mouth of the passage, positioning itself between the flanking hegemony soldiers and Sarah's position. The horse stood perfectly still for a moment, then suddenly exploded into motion. Sarah had seen horses run before, but never like this. The animal moved with the speed and precision of a guided missile, closing the distance to the enemy squad in seconds. What happened next defied everything Sarah thought she knew about horses. The stallion didn't just charge, he fought with intelligence and strategy. He knocked down the first soldier with a perfectly timed shoulder strike, then spun to kick another with his rear hooves. The blow sent the armored warrior flying into a storage tank with enough force to dent the metal. The other soldiers opened fire, but the horse seemed to anticipate their shots. He weaved between last blasts like a fighter pilot, using his momentum and the rocky terrain to stay ahead of their targeting systems. When one soldier tried to draw a bead on him, the horse dropped low and swept the man's legs with his own body, sending him crashing to the ground. "Holy shit," whispered Marcus. "That thing fights like it's been doing this its whole life." Sarah stared in amazement as the horse systematically disabled an entire hegemony squad. He didn't kill them. His strikes were precise, designed to incapacitate rather than destroy. But his effectiveness was devastating. In less than 2 minutes, 8 elite soldiers were down, and the flanking attack had been completely neutralized. The horse trotted back toward Sarah's position, barely breathing hard. As he approached, she could see intelligence in his eyes that went far beyond animal instinct. This was a warrior who had chosen his side. "Easy, boy," Sarah said softly, extending her hand. The horse sniffed her fingers, then gently nuzzled her palm. His touch was surprisingly gentle for an animal that had just dismantled a squad of professional soldiers. "Commander Thakmor is requesting immediate backup," came a voice over the abandoned hegemony comm gear. We have an unknown hostile engaging our forces, Sarah almost laughed. The mighty hegemony empire was calling for backup because of one horse. The stallion looked at her expectantly, as if waiting for orders. Sarah had commanded human soldiers but never an animal, yet something in the horse's manner suggested he understood exactly what was happening and was ready to follow her lead. "Can you help us hold this position?" she asked, feeling slightly foolish for talking to a horse. The animal's ears pricked forward, and he stamped one front hoof twice. It seemed like an acknowledgement, maybe even agreement. "Okay then," Sarah said, checking her rifle's charge. "Let's see if we can buy those evacuees a little more time." As if summoned by her words, the main hegemony assault force appeared at the far end of the passage. Commander Thakamore himself led the advance, his reptilian features twisted in frustration. His perfect military operation was being disrupted by a single animal. The horse positioned himself slightly in front of Sarah, his stance alert and ready. For the first time since the battle began, Sarah felt like they might actually have a chance. The girl and the horse stood together, facing overwhelming odds. Neither of them knew the other's story yet, but both recognized something familiar in their companion, the spirit of those who refuse to surrender, no matter how hopeless things might seem. Commander Thackmore stared down the passage at an impossible sight. His prize warhorse, the broken creature he had purchased for 50 credits, now stood beside a human rebel with the bearing of a seasoned warrior. Storm's posture radiated confidence and readiness, nothing like the defeated animal that had collapsed in the cargo bay just days before. "Sir, should we engage?" Lieutenant Veltar asked, raising his plasma rifle. "Wait," Thackmore commanded, studying the situation. Something fundamental had changed in his horse, and he wanted to understand what. Sarah Chen kept her weapon trained on the hegemony forces, but found herself stealing glances at her unlikely ally. The horse stood steady as a rock beside her, showing no fear of the superior firepower arrayed against them. She had grown up on stories of the ancient cavalry, but those were myths from old Earth. This was real. "Storm," Thackmore called out across the battlefield. "Return to your master." The horse's ears flicked at hearing his name, but he didn't move. Instead, he shifted slightly closer to Sarah, making his choice clear. Sarah's eyebrows rose. "Storm, that's your name, boy?" She reached out slowly and placed her hand on his neck. The horse's muscles were like coiled steel, ready to explode into action at a moment's notice. Thackmore felt a mixture of anger and admiration. His purchase had finally shown its true nature, but it was fighting for the enemy. The irony was almost amusing. "You cannot win," Thackmore announced. "Surrender now, and I will ensure you are treated according to the laws of war." "Counteroffer," Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly across the rocky passage. "You withdraw from our system and we won't embarrass you any further." The audacity of it impressed even Thackmore's hardened soldiers. A handful of miners and one horse making demands of the hegemony fleet. "Very well," Thackmore said. "You have chosen your fate." He raised his hand to signal the attack, but before he could drop it, Storm moved. The horse launched himself forward with explosive speed, covering the 50 meters between the two forces in seconds. But instead of attacking randomly, he demonstrated the tactical intelligence that had been bred into his bloodline for thousands of years. Storm went straight for the heaviest weapon in the hegemony formation, a squad automatic plasma cannon that could have wiped out Sarah's entire position. The gunner tried to track the horse's movement, but Storm was already inside his range of fire. A perfectly timed shoulder strike sent the gunner flying, and the horse kicked the weapon hard enough to crack its power coupling. The other soldiers opened fire, but Storm was no longer where their weapons were aimed. He flowed like water around their formation, striking at key targets with precision that would have made a Special Forces commander proud. He disabled communication equipment with careful hoof strikes, knocked weapons out of hands with calculated bumps, and generally created chaos in the hegemony ranks. Sarah and her people provided covering fire, picking off soldiers who tried to surround Storm, but they quickly realized the horse didn't need their protection. He was providing theirs. "How is this possible?" Veltar demanded as he scrambled to avoid the charging horse. "It's just an animal." But Thackmore was beginning to understand. He had studied human military history during the trade wars. He knew about the partnership between horses and riders that had shaped warfare for millennia. What he was seeing wasn't just an animal. It was a warrior bred from generations of warriors, awakened by the presence of a human worth fighting for. Storm completed his first pass through the enemy formation and galloped back to Sarah's position. He had disabled 6 soldiers and their heavy weapons without seriously injuring anyone. His precision was remarkable. "Good boy," Sarah breathed, amazed by what she had witnessed. She had never seen anything like it. The horse looked at her expectantly, waiting for direction. In that moment, Sarah understood that this wasn't just about survival anymore. She and Storm were partners now, human and horse working together as they had for thousands of years. "Can you do that again?" she asked. Storm stamped his hoof twice and snorted, which Sarah took as agreement. "Then let's finish this." Sarah signaled to her remaining fighters. "Concentrated fire on my mark. Storm will create the opening." The plan was insane, but so was everything else that had happened in the last 10 minutes. Sarah watched as Storm prepared for another charge, his muscles bunching beneath his dark coat. "Mark," she shouted. Storm exploded forward just as Sarah's people opened fire. This time the horse had support. While the hegemony soldiers tried to track his movement, plasma bolts from the rebels picked off anyone who got a clear shot. Storm weaved between the beams, using the crossfire to his advantage. But this charge was different. Instead of simply creating chaos, Storm was herding the enemy soldiers toward a specific position. Sarah realized he was driving them toward a stack of mining charges that had been left near the passage entrance. "Everyone down," Sarah screamed as she realized Storm's plan. The horse reached the mining charges just ahead of the clustered hegemony soldiers. With a precisely aimed kick, he triggered the explosive devices. The blast echoed through the mining complex like thunder. When the smoke cleared, most of Thakmor's assault force was down, their armor cracked and weapons scattered. Storm stood in the middle of the devastation, somehow having avoided the worst of the explosion. Thakmor himself was still conscious, though his ornate armor was scorched and dented. He looked at Storm with new respect and perhaps a touch of regret. "Incredible," he muttered. "I paid 50 credits for the greatest battle beast in the galaxy, and I was too blind to see it." Sarah moved forward cautiously, her weapon trained on the fallen commander. Storm walked beside her, alert for any remaining threats. "Your evacuation shuttles have cleared the system," Thakmor said without being asked. "My sensors show they reached hyperspace 10 minutes ago." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had done it. The civilians were safe. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Thakmor struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on a piece of broken equipment. "I could have lied. But you didn't." Sarah studied the alien commander. "Why?" "Because your horse taught me something about honor," Thakmor replied. "He could have killed my soldiers, but he chose not to. He fought to protect, not to destroy. There is wisdom in that." Storm approached Thakmor slowly, his manner no longer aggressive. The horse seemed to sense that the battle was over and that his former owner was no longer an enemy. "He was never really mine, was he?" Thakmor asked, reaching out to touch Storm's neck. "He was waiting for someone worthy of his loyalty." Sarah felt a strange kinship with the alien commander. "What happens now?" "Now?" Thakmor looked around at his defeated forces. "Now I report that the rebels of Zerion 7 have been neutralized and pose no further threat to hegemony shipping." The truth is not always the same as the facts. Sarah understood. Thakmor was letting them go. As the hegemony forces withdrew, Sarah stood beside Storm, watching the ships disappear into hyperspace. The horse nuzzled her shoulder gently and she scratched behind his ears. "I guess we're stuck with each other now," she said softly. Storm's response was to lean against her slightly, a gesture of trust and affection that made her heart swell with emotion. In the space of a few hours, her life had changed completely. She was no longer just a mining colony leader. She was part of something much older and more powerful. The partnership between human and horse had traveled across the galaxy and taken root among the stars. And this was only the beginning. 3 months after the Battle of Zerion 7, the mining colony had transformed into something unexpected. What started as a desperate stand against hegemony forces had evolved into a symbol of resistance throughout the Outer Rim. Word of the human girl and her battle horse had spread across dozens of star systems, inspiring other colonies to stand up for their freedom. Sarah Chen walked through the expanded settlement, Storm following close beside her. The horse had become as much a part of the colony's daily life as he was of its legend. Children who had been evacuated during the battle, now returned to pet his nose and feed him treats. Workers heading to the mines would stop to greet him each morning. "Sarah," called Commander Rodriguez as he approached across the main plaza. "We've got 3 more ships requesting permission to dock. Word keeps spreading about what happened here." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Every day brought new arrivals. Refugees from hegemony oppression, former military personnel seeking a cause worth fighting for, and traitors willing to risk dealing with a rebel colony. What surprised her most was the diversity of species among the volunteers. "Ma'am?" A young Aqualian technician approached nervously. Her blue-scaled skin shimmered in the artificial sunlight as she spoke. "The new sensor array is operational. We can now detect ships 3 hours out instead of 30 minutes. "Excellent work, Kira," Sarah replied. The Aqualian had arrived 2 weeks ago with advanced technical skills and a hatred of hegemony taxation policies. "Any contacts on the scope now?" "Yes, ma'am. Single ship, configuration unknown. Too far out for detailed scans, but it's not broadcasting hegemony identification codes." Sarah exchanged glances with Rodriguez. Unknown ships could mean anything from traders to bounty hunters to hegemony spies. Storm lifted his head, ears pricked forward. His enhanced senses had detected something the electronic equipment missed. The horse had an uncanny ability to read situations that continued to amaze everyone in the colony. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, following his gaze toward the landing pad. Before Storm could react further, her personal communicator chimed with an incoming transmission. Sarah activated the device and a holographic image appeared. Commander Thakmore looking very different from when she had last seen him. "Miss Chen," the alien commander said formally, "I request permission to land and speak with you privately." Sarah's first instinct was suspicion. Thakmore had honored his word after the battle, but that didn't mean she trusted him completely. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because the galaxy is about to change and you deserve to know what's coming," Thakmore replied. "Also, I believe I owe someone an apology." Storm's ears flicked at the sound of his former owner's voice. The horse's body language suggested recognition but no hostility. "You can land, but you come alone and unarmed," Sarah decided. "Bay 3 in 20 minutes. The transmission ended and Sarah turned to Rodriguez. "Double the security around the landing bays." "If this is a trap, understood." "But Sarah," Rodriguez paused, "what if it's not?" That was the question that worried her most. If Thakmore was being honest, what could possibly bring him back to Zerion 7th? 20 minutes later, Sarah and Storm waited in Landing Bay 3 as Thakmore's sleek personal craft touched down. The ship was smaller than his battle cruiser, but still impressive. A diplomatic vessel designed for speed and discretion rather than warfare. The airlock hissed open, and Thakmore emerged alone as promised. But Sarah immediately noticed he was no longer wearing hegemony military insignia. His armor was the same style but bore no rank markers or unit designations. "You're no longer with the fleet," Sarah observed. "Correct," Thakmore confirmed. "My resignation was accepted 3 weeks ago, along with several other senior commanders who have grown uncomfortable with recent policy changes." Storm approached his former owner cautiously. Thakmore extended his hand and the horse allowed him to stroke his neck gently. "Hello again, Storm," Thakmore said softly. "You look well. Better than I have ever seen you." It was true. Storm's coat gleamed with health. His eyes were bright and alert, and his entire bearing radiated confidence. The broken animal Thakmore had purchased was completely gone, replaced by a magnificent warhorse in his prime. "What policy changes?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The Hegemony Council has voted to authorize extreme measures for dealing with rebel colonies," Thakmore explained. "No more negotiation, no more measured responses. They plan to make examples that will discourage further rebellion." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "What kind of examples?" "Orbital bombardment. Complete sterilization of rebel settlements." Thakmore's reptilian features showed genuine regret. "They intend to start with the most visible symbol of resistance." "Zerion 7, Sarah breathed. "Yes, a fleet of 12 heavy cruisers is being assembled. They will arrive here in approximately 2 weeks. Sarah's mind raced. 12 heavy cruisers could turn the entire asteroid into vapor. There would be no defense against that kind of firepower. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because what you and Storm accomplished here represents something the galaxy needs to see," Thakmore replied. "You proved that courage and intelligence can overcome superior force. You showed that different species can work together for a common cause. The hegemony fears that message more than they fear any weapon. Storm moved to stand between Sarah and Thakmor, not aggressively but protectively. The horse sensed the gravity of the situation and was ready to defend his partner. Also, Thakmor continued, I wanted to thank Storm personally. He taught me that true strength comes from choosing what to protect, not what to destroy. Sarah studied the alien commander carefully. What do you want in return for this information? I want to join you, Thakmor said simply. Several other former hegemony officers feel the same way. We have ships, weapons, and tactical knowledge. More importantly, we have connections throughout the hegemony military. The offer was tempting, but Sarah remained cautious. How do I know this isn't an elaborate trap? Thakmor reached into his armor and withdrew a small device. This contains complete tactical data on the incoming fleet. Ship configurations, commander profiles, planned approach vectors, everything. Use it to verify my information through your own sources. He set the device on the ground and stepped back. Storm sniffed it carefully, then looked at Sarah and stamped his hoof once, his signal for approval. Storm trusts you, Sarah said, picking up the device. That carries a lot of weight with me. But I'll need to verify this information before making any decisions. Of course, Thakmor agreed, but time is short. If we're going to organize a defense, we need to start now. Sarah looked at Storm, who met her gaze with intelligent eyes. The horse had been through military campaigns before, on Earth with riders who faced impossible odds. His expression suggested he understood exactly what they were facing. A defense against 12 heavy cruisers, Sarah mused. That's not a battle, that's suicide. Perhaps, Thakmor agreed. But there are other ways to fight than direct confrontation. Storm demonstrated that quite effectively. Sarah considered the aliens' words. Storm had won their first battle not through superior firepower, but through speed, intelligence, and precise targeting. Maybe the same principles could work on a larger scale. If I accept your help, Sarah said slowly, you understand that you'll be marked as traitors by your own people. There will be no going back. There is no going back anyway, Thakmor replied. The hegemony I serve no longer exists. What remains is an empire built on fear and oppression. I would rather stand with you and Storm against impossible odds than serve that. Storm walked over to Thakmor and gently nuzzled the alien's armored shoulder. It was a gesture of forgiveness and acceptance that spoke louder than any words. All right, Sarah decided. Let's see what you have to offer. But the first sign of betrayal, and Storm and I will personally show you how we deal with enemies. Thakmor's reptilian features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile. I would expect nothing less. As they walked together toward the colony's command center, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just defending a single mining colony. She was becoming the leader of something much larger. With Storm beside her and unlikely allies joining their cause, they might just have a chance against the coming storm. The partnership between human and horse was about to be tested on a scale that would determine the fate of the Outer Rim colonies. 10 days before the hegemony fleet's arrival, Sirion 7 had become the center of the largest military operation the Outer Rim had ever seen. Ships from dozens of colonies filled the asteroid's expanded docking bays, while makeshift training facilities operated around the clock. Sarah stood in the command center, studying the tactical displays that showed their growing but still inadequate force. Final count, Rodriguez reported. 47 ships of various classes, mostly converted freighters and mining vessels. Total crew complement of 800, including civilians with combat training. Against 12 heavy cruisers with full marine complements, Sarah added grimly. We're still vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Thakmor approached from the communications station, where he had been coordinating with his network of former hegemony officers. I have updates from the inner systems. 3 more commanders have declared for our cause, bringing their ships with them. But they won't arrive in time for the battle. Sarah nodded absently, her attention focused on Storm. The horse stood near the main display, his intelligent eyes studying the fleet positions as if he understood military tactics. Over the past week, Storm had developed an uncanny ability to predict enemy movements during their training exercises. Ma'am, called Lieutenant Kira from her sensor station. We're receiving a transmission on a secure channel. Source is, well, it's coming from inside the incoming hegemony fleet. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Put it through, but be ready to cut the connection if this is a trap. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a figure in hegemony naval uniform. But instead of the expected admiral, Sarah found herself looking at a young officer with distinctive facial scars. "This is Commander HFY of the Hegemony Cruiser Retribution," the officer said quietly. "I'm speaking for a group of officers who have serious concerns about our current mission." Thakmor stepped into view of the transmission. "HFY? I thought you were still stationed at the academy." "Thakmor?" The younger officer's scarred features showed surprise. "The rumors are true. You've joined the rebels." "I've joined the right side," Thakmor corrected. "What's your situation?" HFY glanced nervously over his shoulder before responding. "Admiral Cross is leading this fleet personally. He's issued orders that no prisoners are to be taken, and no quarter given. Several of us have served in honorable campaigns, but this is different." Sarah leaned forward. "How many officers share your concerns?" "More than you might think," HFY replied. "But Admiral Cross has placed political officers on every ship. Any sign of disloyalty will result in immediate execution." Storm moved closer to the display, his ears pricked forward attentively. The horse seemed to sense the importance of this conversation. "Can you provide us with tactical information?" Sarah asked directly. "I can do better than that," HFY said. "We can provide you with a weakness in their formation, but you'll need to be very precise about how you exploit it." Over the next hour, HFY transmitted detailed information about the Hegemony fleet's approach pattern. Admiral Cross was bringing his ships in a tight formation, designed to concentrate maximum firepower on the asteroid. But the formation had a blind spot, a narrow window where the ship's overlapping fields of fire created a gap. "The window will only last for approximately 4 minutes," HFY explained. "After that, they'll adjust their formation and the opportunity will be lost." Sarah studied the tactical data with growing excitement. "This could work, but we'd need perfect timing and someone with exceptional piloting skills." "I know someone," Thakmor said, "but you're not going to like it." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the blast doors to the command center opened and Storm trotted inside, followed by an unusual procession. Behind him walked representatives from every species in their makeshift alliance: humans, Aqualians, Volantians, even a few former Hegemony soldiers. "Storm?" Sarah asked, puzzled by his behavior. The horse approached the main tactical display and stood directly in front of it. Then, in a gesture that amazed everyone present, he reached out with his nose and touched a specific point on the holographic representation. "He's indicating the lead ship," Rodriguez breathed. "He wants to target Admiral Cross's flagship." Sarah stared at Storm in wonder. "You understand the plan, don't you? You know what we need to do." Storm stamped his hoof twice and looked directly at her. In his dark eyes, she saw not just intelligence but determination and trust. He was ready to follow her into battle, just as his ancestors had followed their riders for thousands of years. "The plan requires a single ship to penetrate the Hegemony formation at exactly the right moment," Sarah explained to the assembled representatives. "It's essentially a suicide mission." "No," said Marcus, stepping forward. "It's a cavalry charge." The comparison struck home. For millennia, cavalry charges had been desperate tactics used by outnumbered forces against superior enemies. They succeeded not through overwhelming power but through speed, surprise, and the unbreakable bond between horse and rider. "I'll pilot the ship," Sarah decided. "Storm and I work best as a team." "Negative," Thakmor interjected. "You're the leader of this alliance. We can't risk you on a single mission, no matter how critical." Storm moved to stand beside Sarah, his meaning clear. Wherever she went, he would follow. "This isn't just about tactics anymore," Sarah realized aloud. "This is about showing the galaxy that courage still matters, that beings can stand together against impossible odds and win through determination rather than fear." She turned to address the entire group. "Every species represented here has legends about heroes who faced overwhelming enemies. Today we write a new chapter in those stories." The representatives exchanged glances, then began nodding one by one. The young Aqualian technician spoke first. "My people have a saying: the deepest currents flow beneath still waters." "We're with you." Sarah Chin. The Volantian pilot flexed his forearms in what Sarah had learned was a gesture of respect. "The winds carry the brave to victory." "We stand ready." Even the former Hegemony soldiers stepped forward. "We swore an oath to protect the innocent," their spokesman declared. "Today we honor that oath." Storm seemed to understand that a decision had been reached. He moved to the center of the group, allowing representatives from every species to place their hands on his neck or shoulders. In that moment, the alliance became something more than a military necessity. It became a fellowship bound by shared purpose. The mission profile is simple, Sarah announced. We use our entire fleet as a distraction, drawing the hegemony formation into the predicted pattern. Then Storm and I take our fastest ship through the gap and disable Admiral Cross's flagship. How do you disable a heavy cruiser with a single light vessel? Asked Rodriguez. Sarah smiled grimly. The same way Storm disabled that squad of soldiers. Precision strikes at critical systems. Thakmor, your ship has the speed and maneuverability we need. Are you willing to let us borrow it? More than willing, Thakmor replied. But I'm coming with you. You'll need someone who knows hegemony ship layouts. Storm looked at Thakmor and then at Sarah, his expression suggesting he approved of the arrangement. The three of them had formed an unlikely partnership, but it felt right. 6 days until the fleet arrives, Sarah announced. We have that long to prepare for the most important cavalry charge in galactic history. As the representatives dispersed to ready their forces, Sarah remained in the command center with Storm and Thakmor. The horse stood between them, a living symbol of the bond that had brought them together. Are we really going to try this? Thakmor asked. Sarah scratched behind Storm's ears, feeling the steady strength of his presence. A wise horse once taught me that sometimes you have to choose what's worth protecting, no matter the odds. Storm's response was to lean against her gently, a gesture of absolute trust and partnership. Together they would ride into battle one more time, carrying the hopes of the Outer Rim colonies and the ancient spirit of those who refused to surrender their freedom. The hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace exactly on schedule, 12 massive warships arranged in perfect formation against the starfield. Admiral Cross's flagship, the Inevitable, led the formation like a predator approaching its prey. The sight was designed to inspire surrender through overwhelming display of power. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of Thakmor's ship, the Redemption, watching the enemy fleet through the viewports. Storm stood beside her, his presence calm and reassuring despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. His dark eyes reflected the starlight as he studied the approaching vessels. All rebel vessels report ready. Rodriguez's voice came through the communication system from the command center on Zerion 7. The distraction fleet is in position. Sarah activated her comm unit. This is Sarah Chen to all ships. Today we prove that freedom is worth any sacrifice. Make every shot count. The rebel fleet began its desperate attack, 47 ships of various sizes and capabilities spreading out to engage the hegemony formation. Las cannons and missile batteries opened fire, creating a brilliant light show across the asteroid field. The rebel ships were outgunned, but they fought with the desperation of those defending their homes. The hegemony fleet is responding as predicted, Thakmor reported from the pilot's seat. They're tightening formation to concentrate firepower. Sarah watched the tactical display as the enemy ships moved into the exact pattern Vexahai had described. The gap in their formation was beginning to open, just wide enough for a small fast ship to slip through. There, she pointed to the display. The window is opening. Storm moved closer to the display, his intelligent eyes tracking the fleet movements. The horse seemed to understand they were about to make their charge, and his entire body radiated readiness. Engines to full power, Sarah commanded. The Redemption leaped forward like a thoroughbred released from the starting gate. Thakmor's piloting skills were exceptional, threading the ship through the chaos of the ongoing battle. Rebel ships exploded around them as hegemony heavy weapons found their targets, but the distraction was working. Gap opening in 10 seconds, Thakmor called out, his hands dancing over the controls. Sarah placed her hand on Storm's neck, feeling the steady pulse of his heartbeat. Just like old times, boy. Trust your rider. The horse leaned into her touch, his absolute faith giving her the confidence she needed. Mark, Thakmor shouted. The Redemption dove into the gap between the hegemony ships traveling at maximum velocity. For a heart-stopping moment, they were surrounded by the massive hulls of enemy warships, their weapons trained outward at the rebel fleet. Sarah held her breath as they shot through the formation undetected. We're through, Thakmor announced. Beginning approach to the flagship. The Inevitable loomed ahead of them, its armor bristling with weapon systems. It was a ship designed to project power and instill fear, the ultimate expression of hegemony military might. Target the shield generators, Sarah instructed, studying the ship's configuration. Storm, what do you think? The horse looked at the tactical display, then turned to her and stamped his hoof once. His signal for agreement. Agreed. Thackamore, take us in. The Redemption accelerated toward the flagship's shield arrays. Thackamore's piloting was inspired, weaving between defensive turrets that hadn't yet realized they were under attack. The ship danced through the hegemony vessel's defenses like Storm had danced through enemy formations on Zerion 7. Firing, Sarah announced, triggering the ship's weapons. Precision shots struck the flagship's shield generators, causing cascading failures across its defensive systems. The inevitable was suddenly vulnerable, its massive bulk no longer protected by energy barriers. They're launching fighters. Thackamore warned as small craft began pouring out of the flagship's hangar bays. Then we better move fast, Sarah replied. Target the engine control nexus. The Redemption swept along the flagship's hull, its weapons precisely targeting critical systems. Each shot was placed with surgical accuracy, disabling rather than destroying. Sarah wasn't trying to kill the crew. She was trying to remove their ability to fight. Storm suddenly moved to the viewport, his ears pricked forward alertly. The horse had detected something that the ship's sensors had missed. What is it, boy? Sarah asked. Before Storm could respond, Admiral Cross's face appeared on the communication screen. The hegemony commander's reptilian features were twisted with rage. Unknown vessel, identify yourself immediately, Cross demanded. Sarah stepped into view of the communication pickup. This is Sarah Chen of the Free Colonies. I'm giving you one chance to surrender your fleet and withdraw from this system. Cross's laughter was like breaking glass. A human child and a handful of rebels making demands of the hegemony. You will be destroyed for this insolence, or will we? Sarah asked calmly. Look around you, Admiral. Your flagship is disabled, your formation is scattered, and your own officers are questioning your methods. As if summoned by her words, Vexhi's scarred face appeared beside Cross on the screen. Admiral, I must protest these tactics. This is not warfare, it's butchery. Commander Vexhi is relieved of duty, Cross snarled. Security, arrest him for treason. But instead of security officers, more hegemony personnel appeared on the screen. Sarah realized that a mutiny was occurring aboard the flagship. The crew won't follow orders to commit genocide, Vexhi announced. We're taking control of this ship. Storm stamped his hoof twice and moved closer to Sarah. The horse seemed to sense that their mission was succeeding beyond their wildest hopes. This is impossible, Cross raged. You cannot defeat the might of the hegemony with sentiment and idealism. We're not defeating the hegemony, Sarah corrected him. We're awakening it, reminding it what it was supposed to stand for. Across the fleet, similar mutinies were breaking out. Officers who had joined the military to protect civilization were refusing to participate in its destruction. Ships began standing down, their crews unwilling to fire on the rebel colony. The tide of battle had turned, not through superior firepower, but through the power of example. Sarah and Storm had shown the galaxy that courage and compassion could overcome fear and oppression. Admiral Cross, you're under arrest, Vexhi announced from the flagship's bridge. The hegemony fleet hereby recognizes the independence of the free colonies. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had done it. Not just survived, but won something far greater than a single battle. Sarah, Thackamore said quietly, look at the long-range sensors. She turned to see more ships approaching, but these weren't hegemony reinforcements. They were vessels from across the galaxy, representatives of dozens of species who had heard the story of Zerion 7 and come to witness its conclusion. The whole galaxy is watching, Sarah realized. Storm moved to stand beside her at the viewport, looking out at the assembled fleet. The horse that had been dismissed as worthless, the girl who had been written off as a naive idealist, and the alien commander who had chosen honor over orders, had together changed the course of galactic history. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the gardens of New Geneva, the first capital of the Free Colonies Alliance. Storm grazed peacefully nearby, his coat gleaming in the natural sunlight of this beautiful world. Children from a dozen species played around him, completely unafraid of the legendary warhorse. Thackamore approached across the garden, now wearing the uniform of the Alliance Defense Force. The Hegemony Council has officially recognized our independence, he reported. They're also implementing military reforms to prevent future atrocities. Sarah smiled, watching Storm interact gently with a young Aqualian child who was offering him a flower. He always knew this would work out, didn't he? Storm sees things we miss, Throckmore agreed. Perhaps that's why he chose you. Sarah scratched behind Storm's ears as she had so many times before. The horse looked at her with those same intelligent, trusting eyes that had first captured her heart on a battlefield. No, she said softly. I think we chose each other. Storm's response was to nuzzle her hand gently, a gesture of love and partnership that would endure as long as there were those brave enough to stand for what was right. The feeble battle horse had found his purpose, and in doing so had helped others find theirs. In a galaxy that had forgotten the power of compassion, Sarah Chen and Storm had reminded everyone that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from weapons or armor, but from the unbreakable bond between those who choose to stand together against the darkness. Their legend would inspire generations, but for now, they were content to enjoy the peace they had helped create, knowing that when the time came to fight again, they would face it together. The girl who believed in justice and the horse who had never forgotten what it meant to be a warrior.